What if I told you that the woman sitting alone at a cafe reading a book while everyone else is coupled up isn't waiting for someone to complete her story? What if she's actually living the most authentic chapter of her life? In a world that has programmed us to believe that a woman's worth is measured by her ability to be chosen, loved and partnered, there exists a quiet revolution happening in the hearts and minds of women everywhere. They're discovering something that challenges every fairy tale, every romantic comedy, and every well-meaning piece of advice they have ever received, that their completeness was never missing in the first place. This isn't a conversation about bashing relationships or promoting isolation. This is about recognizing a fundamental truth that has been buried under centuries of conditioning. The woman who chooses to live alone, who builds a life centered around her own growth values and dreams, isn't broken. She isn't bitter. She isn't afraid of love. She is quite possibly one of the most emotionally intelligent and self-aware individuals in our society today, yet somehow she's still viewed through a lens of pity, concern, or judgment. Think about the language we use when describing single women versus single men. A man who lives alone is independent, focused, selective. A woman who lives alone is unfortunate, picky, or hasn't found the right person yet. This double standard reveals something profound about how we've been conditioned to view female autonomy. It suggests that a woman's natural state is one of incompleteness, desperately seeking another half to make her whole. But what happens when we completely flip this narrative? The psychological framework that supports this shift comes from understanding the difference between choosing solitude and defaulting to it out of fear. When a woman consciously chooses to live alone, she's making a statement about her relationship with herself that goes far deeper than any external partnership could reach. She's saying that her happiness, her sense of purpose, her emotional stability, and her future don't depend on another person's presence or approval. This level of self-possession is not selfish, it's revolutionary. Consider the woman who wakes up on a Sunday morning with no plans except the ones she creates for herself. She doesn't need to negotiate her time, compromise her preferences, or perform any version of herself for someone else's comfort. She can spend 3 hours painting if that feeds her soul, or she can decide to learn Italian on a whim, or she can simply sit in complete silence and feel perfectly content with her own company. This isn't the lifestyle of someone who's settling for less. This is someone who has discovered the profound richness of self-partnership. The fear of this lifestyle often stems from a fundamental misunderstanding of what loneliness actually is. Loneliness isn't about being alone, it's about feeling disconnected from yourself and others, even when surrounded by people. You can be lonely in a marriage, lonely at a party, lonely in a family gathering. Conversely, you can feel deeply connected and fulfilled while physically alone. The woman who has cultivated a genuine relationship with herself has access to a type of companionship that never disappoints, never judges, and never abandons her. This self-companionship requires a level of emotional maturity that our culture doesn't often encourage, especially in women. From childhood, girls are taught to be relational beings, to define themselves through their connections to others, to prioritize harmony over authenticity. While these traits can be beautiful and valuable, they become problematic when they override a woman's connection to her own inner voice. The woman who lives alone by choice has learned to hear that voice clearly and trust it implicitly. But let's address the elephant in the room, the biological and social pressures that make this choice more complex for women than for men. Women face ticking biological clocks, family expectations, cultural pressures around motherhood, and societal messaging that their value decreases with age if they remain unpartnered. These are real pressures that can't be dismissed with simple affirmations about self-love. However, what's remarkable is how many women are choosing authenticity over approval despite these pressures. The woman who lives alone isn't necessarily rejecting motherhood, partnership, or family. She's rejecting the timeline that others have imposed on her life. She's refusing to make life-altering decisions based on fear, pressure, or the need to conform. If she chooses to become a mother, she wants to do it from a place of genuine desire, not obligation. If she chooses partnership, she wants it to enhance an already fulfilling life, not complete an incomplete one. This approach to life requires what psychologists call differentiation. the ability to maintain your sense of self while in relationship with others. Most people struggle with this balance, either losing themselves in relationships or avoiding intimacy altogether to protect their independence. The woman who has mastered living alone has often developed a high level of differentiation. She can be close without being codependent, intimate without being possessive, loving without being needy. The economic aspect of this choice cannot be ignored either. For the first time in history, large numbers of women have the financial independence to make this choice. Previous generations of women often had to choose between security and autonomy. Today's woman can often have both. This economic freedom has liberated not just individual women, but the concept of womanhood itself from historical constraints. Yet with this freedom comes responsibility. The woman who chooses to live alone must develop skills that were traditionally distributed between partners. She must be her own emotional support system, her own financial manager, her own social coordinator, her own problem solver. This isn't a burden, it's empowerment. Every skill she develops, every challenge she navigates independently, every comfort she creates for herself, adds to her sense of capability and self-reliance. There's also something to be said about the quality of relationships that emerge from this foundation of self-completeness. When a woman doesn't need a relationship for validation, security, or completion, she's free to choose relationships based on genuine compatibility, shared values, and mutual growth. She's not desperate to make any relationship work. She's selective about which relationships deserve her energy. This selectivity often leads to deeper, more authentic connections, both romantically and platonically. The social benefits of women living alone extend beyond the individual. When women model this level of self-possession and contentment, they give permission to other women to consider this path. They challenge the narrative that a woman's life is somehow incomplete without a partner. They demonstrate that happiness, fulfillment, and success can take many forms. This has a ripple effect that expands possibilities for future generations. But perhaps most importantly, the woman who lives alone by choice often develops a relationship with solitude that our hyper-connected world desperately needs. In an age of constant stimulation, endless notifications, and perpetual noise, the ability to be alone with one's thoughts has become a rare and valuable skill. This woman has learned to find entertainment in her own mind, comfort in her own presence, and wisdom in her own reflection. This doesn't mean she's antisocial or hermit-like. Many women who live alone have rich social lives filled with meaningful friendships, family relationships, and community connections. The difference is that these relationships are chosen consciously rather than pursued out of a fear of being alone. She engages with others from a place of fullness rather than emptiness, giving rather than taking, sharing rather than needing. The spiritual dimension of this choice is also worth exploring. Many wisdom traditions speak of the importance of solitude for spiritual growth. The woman who lives alone often has more space for contemplation, self-reflection, and spiritual practice. She can explore her beliefs, values, and purpose without the constant influence of a partner's perspective. This doesn't mean she becomes close-minded. Often the opposite is true. With a strong foundation of self-knowledge, she can be more open to growth and change. Critics of this lifestyle often point to studies showing that married people tend to be happier and healthier than single people. However, these studies often fail to account for the quality of marriages versus the quality of single life. A woman in a fulfilling, growth-oriented marriage may indeed be happier than a woman who is single and isolated, but a woman who is single and thriving may be much happier than a woman in a limiting, draining, or unfulfilling marriage. The key factor isn't marital status, it's the quality of one's relationship with life itself. The woman who has learned to live fully on her own has developed resources that serve her whether she's single or partnered. She's learned to generate her own happiness, create her own meaning, and design her own life. These skills don't disappear. If she later chooses partnership, they enhance it. There's also something powerful about a woman who has proven to herself that she can handle whatever life brings without needing rescue. This isn't about being hardened or closed off. It's about being grounded in her own capability. When challenges arise, job loss, health issues, family crises, she approaches them from a place of inner resourcefulness rather than panic about who will take care of her. The creative possibilities that emerge from this lifestyle are significant. Without the need to coordinate with a partner's schedule, preferences, or limitations, the woman living alone can pursue creative projects, career opportunities, travel experiences, and personal growth with complete freedom. She can take risks that might be harder to navigate within a partnership. She can be spontaneous in ways that commitment sometimes constrains. This isn't to suggest that partnership necessarily limits creativity or growth, but rather that solo living opens certain possibilities that might otherwise remain unexplored. The woman who has experienced this freedom often brings a different energy to any later partnership she might choose. She's not looking for someone to create a life with, she's looking for someone to share the life she's already created. The aging aspect of this choice deserves attention as well. Our society has particular fears about women, aging alone often centered around who will care for them in their later years. But the woman who has spent decades developing her own resources, building chosen family relationships, and maintaining her independence, often enters her later years with more social connections and better self-care skills than women who relied primarily on a spouse for these needs. Moreover, the assumption that marriage guarantees care in old age is increasingly questionable. Divorce rates among older adults are rising, and many women find themselves alone after decades of marriage anyway. The woman who has always been comfortable with solitude and capable of self-care may be better prepared for this reality than someone who has never learned to live independently. The environmental impact of single living is often raised as a concern, but the modern woman living alone is often highly conscious of her footprint. She may live in smaller spaces, consume less, and make more environmentally conscious choices than larger households. Her relationship with material possessions is often different too, without the need to accommodate another person's preferences or accumulate items for a shared future. She can live more minimally and intentionally. The technological age has also transformed what it means to live alone. The woman of today has access to global communities, online learning, virtual relationships, and digital resources that previous generations couldn't imagine. She can feel connected to like-minded people around the world while still maintaining her physical solitude. This combination of physical independence and digital connection creates new possibilities for how we understand community and relationship. Perhaps what's most remarkable about women choosing to live alone is how this choice reflects a fundamental shift in how we understand human fulfillment. For most of human history, survival required partnership and community in ways that made individual choice less relevant. Today, the woman who chooses solitude is often making a statement about what she believes constitutes a meaningful life. She's prioritizing authenticity over security, growth over comfort, truth over approval. This choice ripples outward in ways that extend far beyond the individual woman making it. When a woman demonstrates that she can be complete without a partner, she challenges every other woman to examine her own motivations for seeking or staying in relationships. When she shows that happiness doesn't require traditional milestones, she expands the definition of success for everyone around her. When she lives authentically despite social pressure, she gives others permission to do the same. The woman who lives alone by choice isn't making a statement against love or partnership. She's making a statement about the foundation from which love should grow. She's demonstrating that the most sustainable relationships are those between two complete people who choose each other rather than need each other. She's showing that self-love isn't selfish, it's essential. And she's proving that a woman's worth was never dependent on being chosen by someone else, because she was always enough just as she is. In a world that profits from women's insecurities, that sells solutions to problems it creates, that promotes products and services to fix what was never broken, the woman who lives alone contentedly is a threat to the entire system. She's not consuming self-help books about finding love, not spending money on dating apps, not buying products to make herself more attractive to potential partners. She's not feeding the massive industry built on women's supposed incompleteness. Instead, she's living proof that completeness was always an inside job, that happiness is an internal state, and that the most important relationship anyone can have is the one with themselves. This truth is so simple and so powerful that it's almost revolutionary in its simplicity. In choosing herself first, she's not only transformed her own life, but challenged everyone around her to consider whether they're living from a place of wholeness or searching for someone else to make them whole. The woman who lives alone by choice represents the future of feminine power, not power over others, but power within oneself. Not power that diminishes anyone else, but power that elevates everyone by example. Not power that requires validation from external sources, but power that generates its own light from within. She is both the question and the answer to what it means to be fully human in an age of infinite possibilities. When we examine the daily rhythms of a woman who has chosen this path, we discover patterns that reveal profound truths about human flourishing. Her morning routine isn't shaped by another person's schedule or needs. She wakes when her body naturally rises, not when an alarm dictated by someone else's requirements jolts her from sleep. She can spend 30 minutes in meditation, if that centers her. Or she can dance to music that moves her soul, or she can simply lie in bed and plan her day according to her own priorities and energy levels. This seemingly simple autonomy over her daily rhythms represents something much deeper. It's the reclaiming of a natural relationship with her own biological and emotional cycles. Women's energy levels, creativity, and emotional capacity naturally fluctuate throughout the month, yet traditional relationship structures often demand consistency regardless of these natural rhythms. The woman living alone can honor these cycles, working intensively when her energy is high, resting deeply when her body calls for it, and being creative when inspiration strikes, rather than when it's convenient for someone else. The meals she prepares are another window into this authentic living. She doesn't have to negotiate what to eat, accommodate someone else's dietary restrictions that aren't her own, or cook foods that don't nourish her body or please her palate. She can experiment with cuisines that intrigue her, eat dinner at 10 o'clock if that's when she's hungry, or have breakfast for dinner if that's what she craves. This freedom extends beyond food to every aspect of her environment. Her living space becomes a true reflection of her inner world. Every piece of furniture, every color on the walls, every book on the shelves is there because it resonates with her authentic self, not because it represents a compromise with someone else's taste. She can fill her space with plants, if nature feeds. Her spirit create an art studio in the spare bedroom, if creativity is calling, or keep her home minimally furnished, if simplicity brings her peace. The space becomes a physical manifestation of her internal landscape. The financial implications of this choice extend far beyond simple economics into questions of power, security, and freedom. The woman who lives alone often develops a sophisticated relationship with money that many people in partnerships never master. She learns to budget for one's save for her own goals and make financial decisions based solely on her values and priorities. She doesn't have to negotiate major purchases, worry about a partner's spending habits affecting her security, or compromise her financial goals for someone else's dreams. This financial independence often leads to a different relationship with risk and opportunity. She can take the job in another city if it aligns with her career goals. She can invest in her education, travel, or experiences without having to consider how these choices affect a partner's life or security. She can be generous with her resources in ways that feel authentic to her without having to justify these choices to anyone else. This level of financial autonomy was unavailable to most women throughout history, making this generation's choice to live alone a historically unprecedented form of freedom. The relationship between solitude and creativity deserves deeper exploration. Many of history's greatest artists, writers, thinkers, and innovators have spoken about the essential role of solitude in their creative process. The woman who lives alone has unlimited access to the silence and space that creativity requires. She doesn't have to steal moments for her art, writing, music, or whatever form her creativity takes. She can disappear into a creative project for hours or days without having to explain her absence to anyone or feel guilty about being unavailable. This creative freedom often leads to a different relationship with productivity and achievement. Instead of measuring success by external markers that may not align with her authentic interests, she can pursue projects that genuinely fascinate her. She can spend a year learning photography, dedicate weekends to writing poetry, or take up woodworking, simply because the smell of cedar brings her joy. Her achievements become expressions of her authentic interests rather than attempts to impress or please others. The social dynamics surrounding women who live alone reveal fascinating insights about collective psychology. Often these women become the recipients of others' projections and fears about solitude. Married friends may express pity while secretly envying the freedom. Family members may express concern while unconsciously recognizing their own compromises. Single friends may feel threatened by a woman who seems content with solitude because it challenges their own relationship with being alone. These projections can be challenging to navigate, but they also provide valuable information about the courage required to live authentically. The woman who continues to choose solitude despite social pressure demonstrates a level of self-trust that intimidates those who base their decisions on external approval. Her very existence becomes a mirror that reflects others' relationships with their own authenticity. The misconceptions about women who live alone often reveal more about the observer than the observed. The assumption that she must be lonely reveals the observer's own fear of solitude. The belief that she must be bitter about past relationships reveals the observer's inability to imagine healing and moving forward. The suggestion that she's too picky reveals the observer's willingness to settle for less than what truly fits. Each misconception becomes an invitation to examine whether the observer is living from a place of authentic choice or fearful compromise. The woman who lives alone often develops what psychologists call emotional regulation skills at a level that surpasses many people in relationships. When she's sad, she can't rely on someone else to cheer her up. She learns to comfort herself. When she's angry, she can't blame someone else for her emotional state. She learns to process and understand her feelings. When she's anxious, she can't depend on someone else's reassurance. She develops her own sources of security and calm. These emotional regulation skills don't make her cold or self-sufficient to the point of being unable to connect with others. Instead, they make her a more stable and reliable presence in all her relationships. Friends know they can count on her because she's not dependent on their emotional support for her basic well-being. Family members appreciate her grounded energy because she's not bringing unprocessed emotions or unmet needs into every interaction. The professional advantages of this lifestyle are often overlooked but significant. The woman who lives alone can dedicate herself to her career with an intensity that's difficult to maintain when balancing a partner's needs and expectations. She can work late when a project inspires her travel for business without negotiating with someone else's schedule, or take risks in her career without having to consider how these choices affect another person's security. This professional focus often leads to faster advancement, higher earnings, and more opportunities for leadership. While some may argue that she's sacrificing work-life balance, the woman who has chosen solitude often experiences less stress because she's not constantly managing the competing demands of career and relationship. Her work can become an expression of her authentic interests and capabilities, rather than just a means to support a lifestyle that includes another person. The health implications of living alone are complex and worth examining. While some studies suggest that married people have better health outcomes, these studies often fail to distinguish between healthy and unhealthy relationships, or between chosen solitude and social isolation. The woman who has consciously chosen to live alone often has better health habits than someone who is stressed by relationship dynamics. She can go to bed when her body needs rest rather than staying up late because a partner wants to watch television. She can eat foods that nourish her body rather than constantly accommodating someone else's preferences. She can exercise when and how she wants without having to coordinate with someone else's fitness routine or feeling self-conscious about her body. She can seek medical care when she needs it, without having to justify the expense or time to someone else. The spiritual journey of the woman who lives alone often takes forms that would be difficult to pursue within a partnership. She can attend meditation retreats without having to explain why she needs to be away. She can change her religious or spiritual practices without having to navigate a partner's different beliefs. She can dedicate time to prayer, meditation, or spiritual study without feeling guilty about being unavailable for relationship maintenance. This spiritual freedom often leads to profound personal growth and a deep sense of connection to something larger than herself. Paradoxically, many women who live alone report feeling more connected to the universe, to nature, and to the divine than they ever did when focused on romantic relationships. This spiritual connection becomes a source of strength and guidance that serves them in every area of life. The travel experiences available to women who live alone deserve special mention. She can travel wherever she wants, whenever she wants, for as long as she wants, without having to consider anyone else's vacation, preferences, schedule, or budget. She can book the trip to Tibet she's always dreamed of, spend 3 weeks in Paris just because she wants to improve her French, or take a spontaneous weekend trip without having to explain or justify her choices. Solo travel often provides experiences and insights that are impossible when traveling with a companion. She's more likely to meet locals, try new experiences, and push her comfort zone when she's not having to consider someone else's fears or preferences. She can change her itinerary on a whim, stay longer in places that fascinate her, and leave quickly from places that don't resonate. These travel experiences often become some of the most formative and confidence-building experiences of her life. The relationship with time itself changes when a woman lives alone. Time becomes truly her own, in a way that's impossible when sharing life with another person. She doesn't have to account for how she spends her hours, justify why she wants to read for 3 hours straight, or explain why she'd rather spend Saturday organizing her closet than socializing. This ownership of time allows for a different quality of rest, creativity, and productivity. She can have seasons of intense social activity followed by periods of hermit-like solitude, without having to explain these natural rhythms to anyone. She can stay up all night reading a fascinating book without someone questioning her sleep schedule. She can spend an entire weekend in pajamas if that's what her spirit needs for restoration. This sovereignty over time often leads to a more authentic relationship with her own natural rhythms and needs. The woman who lives alone also develops a unique perspective on love itself. Having learned to love herself deeply and completely, she understands love not as a scarce resource that must be pursued and captured, but as an abundant energy that can be freely given and received. She loves her friends more purely because she's not trying to get her primary emotional needs met through friendship. She loves her family more freely because she's not dependent on them for validation or security. If she chooses to date or enter relationships, she approaches them from this place of love abundance rather than love scarcity. She's not desperately seeking someone to complete her because she's already complete. She's not afraid of being abandoned because she's comfortable with her own company. She's not jealous or possessive because she understands that love multiplies when freely given rather than diminishes. This approach to love often attracts healthier potential partners while repelling those who are looking for someone to complete them or solve their emotional problems. The energy of a woman who is complete in herself is attractive to other complete people and threatening to those who are still seeking external validation. This natural filtering effect means that any relationships she does choose to pursue are more likely to be healthy and growth-oriented. The legacy of a woman who chooses to live alone extends far beyond her own life. She becomes an example for younger women of what's possible when you prioritize authenticity over approval. She demonstrates that happiness, fulfillment, and success can be self-generated rather than dependent on external circumstances. She proves that a woman's worth isn't determined by her ability to attract or keep a partner, but by her ability to create a meaningful life aligned with her deepest values and truest self. This legacy is particularly important in a world where young women are bombarded with messages about their inadequacy, their need for improvement, and their dependence on others for validation. When a young woman sees an older woman living joyfully alone, it expands her understanding of what's possible for her own life. It gives her permission to prioritize her own growth, to pursue her own interests, and to trust her own judgment about what will make her happy. The woman who lives alone by choice represents something that transcends any individual lifestyle preference. She represents the possibility of living fully, of loving deeply, of growing continuously, and of contributing meaningfully to the world, all from a foundation of self-knowledge, self-love, and authentic choice. She is both a mirror and a lighthouse, reflecting back to others their own capacity for wholeness while illuminating a path toward authentic living.